Right, so I am Bree Mills, and for my species presentation, I did a review of the red fox, Vulpes vulpes. And they are under the order Carnivora and in the family Canidae. So here on this image, we can see where they relate to phylogenetically when compared to animals like the red wolf, gray wolf, domestic dog. And they are labeled on here as common fox, but that's kind of a misnomer. They are the red fox. And there's about 45 subspecies of red fox that have been identified. And there's a bit of discussion between biologists about North American red foxes because while they are native to North America, it's believed that early colonizers possibly introduced some European subspecies, and that for hunting purposes, and that those may have hybridized with the native North American subpopulation of red foxes. So there is some debate exactly on what subspecies you do find here in North America. They have the widest distribution of any member of carnivora. They're distributed across the entire northern hemisphere. Here you can see anywhere that's in green is where red foxes have been confirmed. There is a little bit of debate about their status in the Republic of Korea. That's an area of research that's currently ongoing. And they've also been introduced and are very invasive in Australia, like we've talked quite a bit about in this class, and that's where you see all this blue down here is their invasive range. Life as a fox, they are omnivorous, so that means they mainly eat meat, but they can eat berries, vegetation, things like that. They usually breed between December and January, so we're coming up on red fox breeding season. And they tend to give birth between March and April to 4 to 9 kits per litter. They are sexually mature at 10 months of age. However, they usually wait till the yearling mark to have their actual first successful breeding cycle. And family groups are made up of an alpha breeding pair and related non-breeding individuals. And usually you see a number of non-breeding vixens or females that will also help with kit rearing. And they can live up to 15 years in captivity, but they average about 3 to 4 years in the wild. So they have some very unique hunting adaptations. They stalk and hunt their prey using hearing like felids. They also use a kind of a stalk and ambush method, similar to felids, unlike canids who usually use endurance exhaustion method to catch their prey. And it's also been recently discovered that foxes are most successful when utilizing magnetic fields. So they actually line up their body against the the Earth's magnetic field that the prey is on, and that has actually been found to increase success in hunting, especially with prey that can't be seen, like here in tall vegetation or in deep snow cover. And that's also part of the reason why foxes are able to use this unique leaping mechanism to capture their prey. So usually they will slowly stalk, get to a certain distance, and then leap on top of their prey. And that's actually why they're so successful at doing it. They've also become the most successful urban predator in modern times, at least. And that's due to quite a few things. So they are generalists, they're medium sized, and they have several plastic behaviors which allow them to utilize anthropogenic sources of food and shelter. So they really thrive in urban areas as well as the wild. Current research, some research was done into whether there would be skull morphology differences between urban red foxes and rural red foxes, possibly looking at specifically features that would align with domestication syndrome. So domestication syndrome is when you see a shortening of the snout and a larger brain case in an animal, and this is usually related to dependency on anthropogenic sources of food, shelter, things like that. So it was hypothesized that there would be a difference between rural and urban red fox skulls, mainly aligning with this domestication syndrome. They did see shorter snouts in urban populations. However, brain case and therefore brain size was actually smaller in urban foxes than it was in rural foxes. So that was actually contrary to the domestication syndrome hypothesis. And further research is being done to look into why that difference is. Also done in 2020 was looking at the specific adaptations of the red fox population in the urban center of Sydney, Australia. So this is an area where red foxes are invasive. And while a lot of the research is being done in Australia on their impacts on species in the wild and being invasive predators, things like that. This specifically looked at their activity inside the urban center of Sydney. And it had a few interesting findings. So it found that red fox activity decreased with the presence of domesticated dogs, but increased with the presence of domesticated cats. And it was hypothesized that that was because they've actually switched to a nocturnal lifestyle in cities to avoid human interaction. So while domestic dogs are mainly diurnal, domestic cats are usually crepuscular into nocturnal. So that overlap was very interesting. One final research topic that's been investigated recently is if urban foxes were bolder and more innovative than their rural counterparts. And you may have an idea of where this is going, especially with the findings of the skull morphology differences. So to test this, they introduced a novel food item for foxes to exploit both in urban areas and rural areas. And just tested to see how exactly the foxes responded. And it was found that while urban foxes would touch the novel food, they would not exploit it. They wouldn't actually eat it. They'd just touch it and investigate it, whereas rural foxes usually took advantage of that food being offered. And therefore, it was kind of concluded that urban foxes are bolder but not more innovative than rural foxes, which is interesting, aligning with the research on the skull morphology that urban foxes have a smaller brain case and therefore possibly a smaller brain than rural foxes. Conservation status is a little bit of a mixed bag, so they are least concern on the IUCN Red List. And they're a prolific invasive species, especially in Australia, so efforts to eradicate them have been ongoing for quite some time, and I think we've talked quite a bit about that in class. They're also commonly considered a pest in their native range, so there is a livestock risk. It's only about, the paper I found had statistics from about the 1998, and it was less than 5% of livestock loss actually being attributed to red foxes, but still that can be impactful on someone's livelihood depending on how big their herd is. And this is usually sheep and goats that we're talking about. They're not taking down cattle. And then there's also the human and pet health risk with zoonotic diseases such as distemper, parvovirus, mange, things like that. So usually red foxes are seen as a pest in their native range. They're not really appreciated for the really cool species that they are, especially with all these adaptations that have really helped them thrive in anthropogenic settings. And here are my list of references, and I hope you guys have learned something about the red foxes and hopefully appreciate them a little more.